Hey, everybody. Welcome for Time and Again, Clay, otherwise known as the episode where the primary costume designer went on strike for this episode, and this episode alone, leaving the cast and producers only with a box of candy corn costumes from the local Halloween outlet that they had to put to good use, and I think that they did. I think they did do that.
I assume you're joking.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how strikes work in Hollywood.
Too close to reality. All we have are these candy corn outfits that vaguely look like Star Trek cosplay outfits because the shoulder design is exactly the same as the Starfleet uniform. It's just a weird color. On and on.
What if we just level the playing field gender-wise with clothing and have everybody wear corsets?
They were ahead of their time. They were ahead of their time and time again. This is...
I thought it was interesting because there was the colored ones who look like, medieval harlequin jesters. And then there were the other guys.
The guards.
Who were like the security guards who just had like black long sleeve T-shirts with like a bad graphic design on the front of it. Like a tiny little...
They had the...
It's very strange.
They had the little like headband ear muff one-piece things too that were on their heads. It was just it's a strangely, the production design in this one is kind of strange. But anyway, it's called Time and Again. It is the 4th episode of Voyager's first season. Came out on January 30th, 1995. It was written by, teleplay goes to David Kemper and Michael Piller. Story credit goes to David Kemper. Directed by Les Landau. And universe date, specifically, it's not known, but it's 2371. End of day. In this episode, called Time and Again, while investigating a massive explosion that destroyed all life on a planet, Janeway and Paris are swept back a day in time where they must prevent the explosion. First things first, that log line is much better than the Roku log line, which I have to bring up because it kind of spoils the episode. It doesn't spoil it, but it tells you more information than is necessary in a log line on the Roku blurb. Did you notice that?
I didn't, no.
It tells you, it's something along the lines of like, Paris and Janeway go back in time to stop an explosion, or do they realize that they caused the explosion? Like they throw that little bit of information into it, and it's like, ow, it kind of tainted me for the episode because the entire time that everything. I think you predict that. I don't think it's unpredictable that they're going to be responsible somehow for what happens, but it's nice to not know it right from the start, I think, is a better way to approach that kind of an idea.
Yeah, I actually didn't guess it. I think because I was too preoccupied with really marveling at how confident Janeway was about not knowing anything about what's going on. They get to the end and she is so out of her element, but she is so confident that it's just like whatever you guys are doing is going to fuck this thing up and everyone's going to die. So we're just going to wait here. And the guy's like, do you have any idea where we even are right now? Like, do you know what you're standing next to or how any of this technology works? And she's just like, I do not. And I don't care.
Don't make me shoot this gun at you, you son of a bitch. She is very confident in this one. So time and time again, or it's just time and again, another time travel episode right in a row, which is nice.
Yeah, I was surprised.
Another decent episode, I think. I kind of like this one. I didn't think this one had... I think some patron in the previous episode had mentioned, like, I feel that this episode is pretty good, but I think I'm going to see a lot of episodes like this, so I'll give it a 3. And that's not really how my rating scale works, but I feel that this one is on par with Parallax in a lot of ways. Like, I think it's kind of the same quality of episode. So I think that there are basically good and bad things about the episodes that we've seen. And I think Time and Again is no different than any of it. I think that there are, like, it continues this thing of, I really like the character work in this show so far. I think it's just better than Enterprises was, to say that again, but it's like,
definitely.
It's so
100%.
much easier to just sit with these characters, and even when they're not really doing anything, I kind of enjoy it. Like, I don't like the scenes where is an episode of contradictions, kind of, because I really like this concept of being in the same place at different times, and the two sides are trying to figure out what's going on in each time and whether or not they're in the same room as the person as Janeway was when the thing happened. So I don't think that the stuff in the present, the quote unquote present after the explosion, I don't think those are like riveting scenes. And it's a lot of technobabble and people looking at their tricorders going like, well, if we shoot this thing with this thing, nothing will work. But I still find the character interactions to carry a lot of it. Like there was one line that like when they find the melted Starfleet badges and B'Elanna's like, looks like they died in the explosion. And Tuvok just has this great line. He's like, all this proves is that their badges were caught in the explosion. Then he just like walks off and I was like, that's a good Vulcan line right there. Like that is all that proves.
Yeah.
And so I like that stuff.
Yeah, I think I like this one a little less than Parallax. I did like the character interactions, but I felt like this one was not really it wasn't as meaty of a story for me as Parallax was, as far as like characters go and themes and stuff. Like is the whole thing supposed to be like an atomic energy allegory?
I was wondering if
it's the first thing I thought of.
Yeah, if it's a criticism of nuclear energy, but if anything, it's a criticism of any kind of energy, because gas lines explode, as that happened in that town in Massachusetts like 2 years ago or whatever. Like,
true.
Any kind of energy fuel going into people's homes is going to blow up potentially. So I didn't think it was specifically nuclear, even if that implies to be the case. But so I guess the reason I like this one is because Observer Effect is my favorite Enterprise episode. And I like Observer Effect because it is a swift enunciation of the TNG version of what the Prime Directive is. What I like about Time and Again is it's probably the most convincing argument I've seen for the TNG argument, which is nice. Like, so even though I think that their ethics and their like the way that they view the Prime Directive is kind of immoral and unethical, this is the best case argument for it, I think, even though it relies heavily on time travel and stuff to get the point across. I still think that like this is a very effective example of why you don't interfere with places. Although the counter to it is there's no intent on the Voyager crew to do anything. So I think that kind of shoots you in the foot. Like if you're not intending to do anything could happen, right? And you could say that you are or you either are or are not responsible for the thing that happened. So there's no intent that they're supposed to interfere with people, which I think is the problem with it. But what I do like about it is that it is a sort of like really sci-fi way of showing through the best of intentions, they cause this causal chain of stuff to happen, which results in a bad outcome, which is like a fairly effective argument for the Prime Directive, even if I still disagree with it. But that's what I like about it. It's the opposite of Observer Effect.
Yeah, I really liked that was when it really started picking up for me, is when they got to that moment where Janeway just threw it out the window and we just started telling everybody everything. Because excuse me, I think my where this one lacks a bit for me is I couldn't really tell what the stuff in the past was about, really, because they didn't get into much of the civilization they were in, or any, like even the part where they're like storming the power plant or whatever. I'm not really sure what the two sides are in this situation. Like, and then it ultimately ends up not being about that, but the thing it is about comes late enough in the episode where I felt like they had, I don't want to say wasted time, but had wasted an opportunity to kind of get into some stuff. But once that kicks in and you see, okay, she's throwing the Prime Directive out the window, and then it ends up being like this interesting sidestep of the Prime Directive that actually solves the problem because they caused the problem.
Yeah.
I thought that was really fun. It is an interesting paradox though, because like, I mean, they were investigating, like you said, under the best of intentions. So, and they're investigating after this cataclysm has already happened. So the Prime Directive doesn't really apply there, I would guess.
Right.
Unless,
there's no.
Is there a rule? Yeah, is there a rule that you can't interfere if everybody's already dead?
No, I think someone has to be conscious and be able to see you for it to be a problem.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a weird kind of. It was probably one of the better Prime Directive episodes I've seen in a while because of they found a new take on it where it's like, well, how does this hold up against if you, under the best intentions of upholding the Prime Directive, actually end up causing the thing that you tried not to cause.
Yeah.
So it's really fun. It's a cool idea.
Yeah, it's a neat combination of time travel, the Prime Directive, which I generally think is kind of a boring concept and either like immoral or just wrong. But they also there's this like I think it does its best work at just trying to prove the Prime Directive. And like I thought it was also just kind of a prescient episode just because it's like the Prime Directive is basically interventionalism. And we're recording this on like the second day of the Ukrainian tragedy with Russia and stuff like that. And it's interesting. It's just like, I don't think that that's really an interventionalist situation in the way that the Prime Directive is supposed to be. But it is kind of a interesting philosophical argument that I think Janeway, like, if I have any kind of sort of strange issue with it, it's that I think that there was a time and a place in this episode for Janeway to really come to grips with the Prime Directive in a way that she doesn't. So I'm still kind of stuck in Enterprise mode where when I'm watching this, Janeway says she's like, we have to uphold the Prime Directive and not tell anybody about what we've done. And then it smash cuts to the scene where the guy's there and she's like, I'm from the future. And I'm still in an Enterprise mindset where I'm like, oh, they're not going to explain why she changed her mind like that. They're just going to kind of go along with it. But then she does explain it. And I think that wishy-washiness is kind of like indicative of the idea itself. Like I think there is a good place to argue against and for the Prime Directive, just like there's a way to sort of argue for and against interventionalism in like the international sphere and stuff like that. It's just that I think a lot of the Star Trek episodes do a bad job of it. Like they don't really seem to understand what they're talking about. But I thought that this one was as clever as you could be with that in mind. You know, it's like it's clever, but it also doesn't really apply because you go, well, they need time travel for something this strange to happen. And that's not going to happen in reality. So I don't really feel that connected with the material in the long run.
Yeah, I think the Prime Directive, excuse me, is something that's interesting to look at in general because when you kind of start slicing it up, you get into these really interesting ethical and moral questions. But it stems all from the idea that in this version of the future where they have space travel and the Prime Directive is a thing, you're operating from a position of basically being a god.
Yeah.
And so it is whether or not you as a god should step in and alter the course of a planet's history just because you can. And which I think in and of itself is a really interesting question. But when they do use it as kind of a crutch, I think that's when it becomes ethically and morally interesting because it's usually used as like an excuse as to why they have to let like a genocide happen or something. You know? But so I think using it in this way is interesting because they are presenting this idea that your godlike power has done this by accident because you are trying not to interfere. And it's a really interesting kind of fun.
You weren't even aware that they were there. You know, you just kind of showed up. You just walked into the room and someone happened to be there. And is it your fault that happened, you know?
Yeah. And it's even like trickier than that because it's like, because you're showing up after the fact. Yeah. You know, and so it's a really tricky sort of thought question that I think she I like that she throws it out the window at a certain point. But again, even there though, I think it's so fascinating to me in this because she's not doing it because she knows what the answer is. She's doing it because she has no idea what the answer is. As I was saying, like when they go to the power plant there, she's got no clue what's going on. She's basically throwing everything at the wall trying to figure out how to stop this thing, which includes saying she's from the future, which includes threatening to kill people, and to the point where the only thing that tips her off is when, she actually sees what's going on. But it is really fascinating where it's like she has gotten to a point where she is like, is she trying to, like, if she was adhering by the Prime Directive, obviously she would let everybody die and she would let herself die, right?
Yep.
And it's like, what is the moment where she decides that that's not the right way to go?
Well, I think that's what's flimsy about it, is that her decision to betray, in air quotes, the Prime Directive is born plot-wise from her realization that she has to explain to the audience what the plot mechanics are at this point, right? So her whole thing about she doesn't betray the Prime Directive because it's a point in time where she can take advantage of that fact. She does it because the plot demands that she explain that they've already traveled through time and caused this situation to happen. So therefore, like it's a really by the book nerd interpretation of the Prime Directive. There's like no real personality going into that decision, which is interesting. She's just doing it to get the plot across. But go ahead.
But she does it earlier than that though, because she doesn't know that they are the cause of it when she's given it all up.
She does it in the office, right? She says, "My name is Catherine Janeway, and I'm from the future." And then in the next scene, that scene ends. The next scene is Tom going, "Why did you tell that guy what the thing is?" And she explains, "Well, because we've already done this, because we caused this, so therefore we've already violated the Prime Directive. So now I can do it again."
Okay, so she's just speaking theoretically at that point, right? She's like, our existence here might be the thing that caused it.
Yeah, she's correct, but she is guessing at what has happened.
Yes. Right. Yeah. Okay.
Right. The only other thing about the Prime Directive that I thought is funny is the episode also does the funny thing that it also kind of shows how unnecessary the Prime Directive is, because if you're dealing with a pre-warp species, right, that's just like basically like humans, like us. If you were to violate the Prime Directive and tell them about it, there's a 99.9% chance they will not believe you and think you're crazy. There's always this fear in the captains. They're like, we can't tell them anything about it. But if you go down, you're like, I'm the captain of a starship and I'm from the future. They go, yeah, all right. What continent are you from that you don't know what the clock looks like? Right. It's stuff like that. That's how, I don't think there's ever been a Star Trek episode that's played that up enough. The crew is trying to convince them of something, and people just going, "I don't think that's true. That doesn't sound right." That's
isn't that kind of more or less like what Star Trek 4 is, or they're trying to keep it under the vest at that point, right? I can't remember. But I mean, if you just think about that in realistic terms, if tomorrow Captain Jean-Luc Picard showed up on CNN and was like, "Hi, I'm from the future on a starship." It's like, oh, all right, sure, bud.
Well, change the channel. This thing is they're grasping for ratings. Yeah,
or everybody as soon as he shows up would scream and yell "demon" like that child did.
Yeah,
which I thought was a very interesting response.
Equally,
under what situations would you need to like this? Like, even if you were a kid and you saw two people just appear out of nowhere in a crowded space, would you immediately scream at the top of your lungs and yell "demon"?
Demons. Well, this is a pretty generic sci-fi race they've come across, right? Like, there's nothing really interesting about these people. They believe in demons, but they're also like extremely advanced in some ways. Like, they have this power system. They're not extremely religiously set up.
They do that thing that I hate, which is just like the sign of the most base level science fiction writing, where they come up with like a term that is overly technical for an everyday item. For instance, in this one, the guy's like, go have more of that confection bar that you were eating before. It's like it's not futuristic because you said confection bar instead of candy bar. You know, I hate that stuff. It's so hacky.
It's kind of a bad version of just because I read the 1984 Orwell language, where there's like a poetry to what he did, but this is just like replacing a word with another word that they looked up in the thesaurus and did it. What I thought was funny about this race was their pistols are just like pistols from the 20th century.
Yeah. that everything, that was one thing where when I was watching this episode, I was going, oh boy, I think we are in for some rough production design in this show, because
we mentioned that last episode. Just on the ship design, but this is the world design.
Yeah, the guards were just wearing, their uniforms were awful, and everybody's carrying just like prop pistols.
Yeah.
And they're like still using like squib hits on the wall and stuff, but instead of a gun noise, it's a laser blast. It was very strange.
It was. So
it just made me like, okay, this is going to be some low rent Star Trek on this show, I think.
Yeah. Did before we move on to another topic, I just would stress that, like, I did think that this was one of my favorite Prime Directive episodes. Really, like, it kept my attention. It had something actually interesting to say about it, even if I disagree with it. And the mechanics for how it worked were neat. I still heavily feel an influence of TNG on this quite a bit. Like that take on things is a very TNG influence, and I'm not sure that I think that will age particularly well as we move into the series. But the only downside of it is that I would have preferred. Well, I guess it ties into the ending somewhat, so we can do it here. So the ending just resets everything, and I think that was a big mistake. I think that the ending should not. I think that what they do should result in that explosion on that planet. I don't know what.
So you think that they shouldn't get the save? You think they should have to deal with the fact that they killed an entire?
Well, I'm really conflicted, because I think that makes more sense emotionally. But they shouldn't be sad in that case, because it's ultimately not really their fault. That's just like a completely bizarre thing that happened, you know, like.
Yeah, but like that's like finding out that your car that you parked very securely, like the brakes went off and rolled down the hill and killed somebody. It's like you're still going to feel bad, even though it has nothing to do with the fact that it's not due to anything you did, but it's still you inadvertently caused the death of, in this case, a planet's worth of people, which again, 3 episodes into a new Star Trek show, not a great way to build sympathy for main characters and a crew.
No, it's not. I guess that my thing is they're like, so if they're trying to sell the Prime Directive, that the Prime Directive, this is why you don't interfere, because horrible things can happen to you. I think that the only way, like, if it's not saying that you shouldn't interfere at all because you don't know what the consequences are, what the episode is saying through the reset is that it's okay to interfere every once in a while, because things will probably turn out right. You know, I don't think it squares with what it's arguing is the point of the Prime Directive, really, which is that you shouldn't, even through temporal mechanics, you shouldn't interfere with things because you have no idea what the outcome is going to be, you know?
Well, I think that's where the episode gets muddy for me, because by the end of it, I wasn't even really sure what they were trying to say. I feel like whatever message or whatever the theme is, I feel like gets kind of muddled. Maybe that's because of the time travel mechanics that are in play or what. Because like it's what do you come away with from the episode at the end? Because like it just don't help anybody ever, I guess.
Yes,
is the takeaway.
That's what I take to be the takeaway. If you accept on its face what this plot is about, is that like even unintentional interference can lead to disaster, which is a very difficult way to live life, because you'll never know what went wrong because of what you did. But
Right.
I don't think the episode does anything to argue against that point of view with the plot.
Yeah, not really.
Because they save the people, I guess, at the end, but it's only through interfering, right? I guess it's reconciling their interference is what they do. But then you start getting into the weird time travel aspect of it, and you're like, well, they didn't really reconcile anything. Like they didn't learn anything, and it's only Kes at the end that seems to have an idea of what happened to them through that entire adventure. So I'm not sure. It's just, it feels more like it's a Star Trek episode, has to end. We'll make it a happy ending, and they won't have killed all these people. But I don't know if anyone will really learn anything because of it.
Yeah, I mean, there's literally no way they could learn anything because as it stands at the end, the events of the episode do not happen. So,
well, sorry, here's the other way to look at it. The time travel thing, right, it goes through all the exact same way, except Janeway and Paris get back home to Voyager, and it resets, but the planet is still destroyed. So what that is saying is that you can unintentionally cause outcomes that are bad, and you're not even aware of the fact that you've done anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's still a really tough place to end an episode of Star Trek on.
It is, but I think that's like the only interesting way to approach this Prime Directive story.
Any version of this story that ends with a planet's worth of people are dead because of something that the Voyager did.
I want that kid to die.
Really tough way.
I want that annoying kid.
Clearly, I can tell. Yes.
I'm like Brandon Braga writing Trip in the series finale of Enterprise. I just want him to die.
You know, yeah, it's a really tough place to end up. And I mean, I think honestly, you probably have to consider the fact that maybe they weren't actually trying to say anything about the Prime Directive or the use of it or whatever, and they were just doing something kind of like novel with it. Because I do think they're in a really tough spot, because if you end that episode with everybody's still dead, and it's because of, inadvertently or not, it's because of Voyager trying to help survivors on the planet, that's a really dark place to end your episode. And in an episode that is not playing with those things really.
Yeah.
Like this episode is very much more of like it's literally a ticking clock episode. And that's kind of what I was saying, where they don't really do a lot in the middle of it. So what you're left with is just Voyager trying to solve the problems. And it's fun. And it's a fun Star Trek, fun sci-fi inversion of the Prime Directive and stuff. But like, they're not really getting into a lot of theme about it. And so if you were to end this episode as it stands with an ending that's that big of a downer, I think that's really going to be not ring true to the story that they were telling. I think there is a different story they could tell that ends that way, and it doesn't feel like it's devastating and incredibly dark. Well, I mean, it's going to be dark either way, but you know what I mean.
Yep.
But I don't know if this episode is built for that kind of ending.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I would just stick with it, because I think that's the only way that what they're talking about with the Prime Directive means anything, is if those people actually suffer some kind of consequence from it. I think that it's a flaw of the ideology that you can't end it that way in a way that only makes sense. I think that like proves that there's a problem with their idea of what the Prime Directive should be. I just think that the reset is fairly unsatisfying to me. It's not a great... It's also because Kes is the only one who remembers, but Kes wasn't on the planet with them. Right? Like, Kes is just another...
Furthering my theory that Kes is going to be a problem
problem character.
Sooner than later. Yeah, I feel like she's kind of all over the place because she's got mental powers now, which, sure.
The Ocampa thing is weird. Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
I think... I don't see any reason why you couldn't have Janeway and Paris remember what happened. And so at the end there, everything resets, but Janeway and Paris both remember the events and what they caused, and then have a moment where the two of them kind of talk to each other about it, so you can have the planet be saved, but then also have Janeway and Paris acknowledge the darkness that comes with what just happened and the fact that they inadvertently caused the death of all these people.
Yeah.
Even though they saved them in the end. I think there's room for that a final scene like that. I'm actually kind of surprised that they didn't do that, because doing a hard reset where everybody just it's like nothing ever happened.
Right.
It's like, that's for Star Trek, that doesn't really sit. Usually there are people, and even with Kes, it's like, it's not like Kes doesn't know the Prime Directive. Like, there's literally a scene, I think, if I remember correctly, where someone has to explain it to her what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And like, having her be the person that remembers doesn't mean anything, because she doesn't understand the gravity of what you. Well, I mean, she understands the gravity on one level, but she doesn't understand it on like a Starfleet level.
Yeah, well, she doesn't understand it in the sense of what the episode has been doing, really. She understands that a lot of people aren't dead, which is probably a good thing. Yeah.
So I wish they had Janeway and Paris, or maybe even just Janeway, remember. No, I think it would probably need to be both of them, Janeway and Paris. Remember what had happened, if only so someone can glean something from this event instead of just, fixing the problem, setting everything back to one, and then going on their way.
Yeah, because they set them up as oppositional in terms of the Prime Directive, because when they get there, Janeway's like, we can't tell them anything, it'll violate the Prime Directive. And Paris has the, in my opinion, like rational response to that is like, well, anything has to be better than just genocide of them. Like, it's not genocide, but anything has to be better than just the mass destruction of this society. Like, if they think that there's a spaceship out in space, like who knows? So they don't really continue that thread. That's just kind of like voiced at that point, but they don't have them reconcile at the end and discuss what they've learned through the course of their adventure.
I think what's fascinating about the Prime Directive thing is, I actually think Star Trek Into Darkness has an interesting kind of take on the Prime Directive element at the beginning of the Into Darkness, because I do think there's a question of, why can't you influence something or step in a cataclysmic event situation as long as you maintain your cover, basically. So, because the mind-bending element of the Prime Directive is that there are spacefaring people who can fly faster than the speed of light and go planet to planet. If you don't expose that part, why is it so bad to go down and prevent a volcano from killing millions of people? Or you know what I mean? Where it's like, if you can step in and alter things or fix things in a way that doesn't completely blow up the fundamental understanding of how the world works for a species or civilization. Yeah, I think there's wiggle room there where you can do that and still maintain that you didn't do anything wrong, or you didn't quote unquote break the Prime Directive. Yeah, but in which case I'm surprised that Paris doesn't push harder from that end, because it's like, in this situation, it's like, well, these people are already dead. Like, something blew up, killed all these people. We have an opportunity to possibly save them. Yeah. And I know the Prime Directive says we can't interfere, but we wouldn't be interfering by landing Voyager down from the sky and taking everybody off. You know what I mean? There's like I feel like there's different ways to interpret how you would handle that situation.
Yeah. I mean, it's built around the flawed idea that the whole problem is that people just can't know about you. And it's not about the inherent moral decision of, I know what's better for you than you know, which is really the reason that this argument, it's like it's all based on like moral relativism. It's like, who am I to tell you what's the right thing to do? Who am I to play God? Basically, like you have to figure it out. And I think that runs into that problem there where like an interesting Prime Directive conundrum would be, say it's this same exact plot, except this alien race that they find are like rapist, murderer, child molester people, and it's like, then you're like, oh boy, like we'd be better off letting these people blow up, wouldn't we? But that would violate the Prime Directive. Is that the right thing? Are we really so right to choose that these rapists need to be murdered? So I think that's the thing that Star Trek can never really get into, but that's what the hard decision in a Prime Directive would be, is if you run into a much worse society and you could get rid of them, is that the right thing to do?
Yeah. I think it's born of interesting idea. Well, I think it's born of basically the what if you could go back in time and give the American revolutionaries laser cannons? It's like a lot of things would change. That's not letting things play out naturally.
Right.
But yeah, I think that there is some interesting room to get into different conversations about stuff when it comes to that, because it is such a fascinating idea that, like, in the one sentence form makes sense, right? Like, you write, it's like, oh yeah, okay, it makes sense for these people to live by this thing, until you apply it to certain situations, and then you see, okay, well, it's not so easy just to put one sentence instructions on how to handle this stuff.
Well, it brings it down to, if you truly have a belief system, it's hard to take the moral relativism makes everything meaningless to you, because if you truly believe something, it's kind of like, extremely religious people. On one hand, you understand them being so fervently anti-abortion and stuff like that, because it's like in their worldview, this is a genocide that's happening,
right?
This is a horrible thing that should be stopped. So what it doesn't make sense to have that sort of religious worldview, but also be like, well, people can just do whatever they want. At that point, it's like, why do you even have the belief then? Because it clearly doesn't mean anything to you if you're not willing to stand up for that belief. And I think that's the problem with the Prime Directive, is that the Federation has all these values and ethics about things, and it's largely like this, like, utopian liberal society type situation, but it doesn't want to actually tell people about it. It's like, it's better to live in the caves like these people and just, not have any kind of like improvement to their lives. I think it just runs into that problem over and over again.
Yeah. And I mean, even in the case of the religious example you're using, a big part of, well, at least, I would say most religions, I would guess, is the free will element of it, where it's like, there's the religious aspect, but baked into that is the idea that humans can and will do what they want. They can make their own choices.
Right.
And so, you run into the same problems there, where it's like, who am I to tell what's right or what's wrong? But also there's some things that feel more wrong or more right than other things. And it's a sticky situation to be in. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the, I guess it all just comes down to really examining what that means, and the Prime Directive is never really going to examine what that means. I don't think.
Right.
You could have they could have a whole Star Trek season about a Prime Directive issue. It's a topic that could span a season if there was one event that was interesting enough to really play off of. We talked briefly about Kess. I was not pleased with the Kess direction here. I was like, I don't need this, whatever this is going to do. Neelix is fairly annoying with her, but I don't think he was as annoying as in Parallax. And the rest of it was just, I just wanted to hit again that point that I really enjoyed the idea of a time travel episode where the two characters are in different time in the same spot. I think that's kind of a neat concept, but any of those three, if you want to touch on them briefly.
Have you ever seen the Denzel Washington movie? Deja Vu?
No, that's the New Orleans police one, isn't it? Is he a detective or something?
Tony Scott movie?
Yeah,
it's a time travel movie. It's a time travel movie. And it plays a lot with being in the same place as somebody else, but in two different times. Like there's this amazing gimmick about halfway through the movie that, well, the whole gimmick is they've got this time, they can look into the past, but they can only look X number of hours into the past. And there's like a certain scope. There's limitations to it. It's fun. But I know I've brought this up before. There's a great scene about maybe halfway through where there's a car chase where Denzel Washington is chased. He's got a mobile time travel visual unit that he's wearing that can see 2 days into the past, but he has to remain within a certain distance with the target. Yep. And so the target starts moving and gets into a car. So he has to chase the car that's driving the same roads he's driving 2 days ago. Yeah. But he's now driving at the same. So it's really fun. It's a very cool concept. Kes is the only thing that I liked about Kes is that she was the vehicle for another great Doctor scene. Yeah. I really like the Doctor. My favorite thing about the Doctor so far is that he is completely oblivious to everything else that's going on. So he constantly thinks his bullshit stuff is the most important thing that needs to be dealt with. Yeah. Even though he's like,
the captain's missing.
Yeah, can you call the captain and get her down here to fix this? And like, the captain's gone. She's stuck 2 days in the past. He's like, what? Well, then get the next available officer, I guess.
I like the Doctor subplot. They're not really hitting it, but that's just the beat that the Doctor is going on. My favorite thing about Kes is I liked her sort of Spider-Man-y outfit in this one, where she has
that was a cool look. I like that.
The strangest thing about Kes is that she's this Ocampan, right? And now they're going to start making big deals about they have psychic abilities. I feel that Caretaker, the pilot, didn't really stress them enough for me to feel that this is like a legitimate development for this character, that they're kind of like some kind of like god characters that they've got tagging along with them. It just, I don't know. It feels, to me, it just feels like it's a lack of, it's early, so this probably isn't the case, but it feels like a lack of like, what do we do with these two? That, and the other thing that I think we're probably early in, but I know this is going to be the case, like, how much do they really expect Neelix to know about this place? Like, they're going incredibly fast, very long distances. He's not going to know a lot after he gets out of his neighborhood, you know?
He's relying, or I should say they're relying on him to know stuff as someone would rely on you to know stuff about a state you're driving through on a road trip. Yeah. Because you say, I went on vacation here once. Oh,
or you just live in the state. We just, like, if I was out in Western Mass and I was just like, I don't know what this is. Yeah. Yeah. It's like, oh, you live in Massachusetts. What's the best way for me to get to Cape Cod? I was like, I don't know. What's the best pizza place in Williamsburg? It's like, I don't know.
Yeah. It's the same thing that happens to me, actually, basically, anytime we talk to friends or family, because everybody assumes that we live in Boston. Yes. And we don't. We live like just outside of Boston, like where it's a very short drive to Boston. But everyone's like, what's it like downtown these days? And it's like, I've been here for 10 years. I can count on like two hands the number of times I've gone, quote unquote, downtown.
Downtown. No, I know.
Do they still have that pizza place that I like? Buddy, couldn't tell you.
Red Sox are still there. Yeah, that's the Neelix problem. The final thing before we go to,
I just wish Neelix had like an angle. I think I said that in the first episode or so. Like, he doesn't have, like, there's no subterfuge built into him. He's not malicious. He doesn't have something he wants. He doesn't have something that any information that he does or doesn't give them is driving him towards. Yeah. Like, so many of the other characters on the show are very well defined, and maybe they don't have, legitimate issue to issue wants or needs or whatever. Like I said before, they can have conversations and they are coming from specific points of view. So those conversations can feel in character when they have them, and that's why I feel like the conversations in this show so far have been more gratifying than the ones in Enterprise. Yeah. Neelix doesn't have that. Neelix and Kes are just there. Yeah. And they don't really have anything they're about. so they end up feeling just kind of like dead weight.
Yeah, it's you've sparked me for they are dead weight, and talking about how the characters having like fun conversations in a way that I don't think Enterprise ever did. I love the Tom and Harry thing where he's like, "You're not going to see your girlfriend again. Let's go fuck these twins."
I had so many questions about that. I was like, wait a minute, hold on. How rare is it or common is it for two sisters or two people from the same family to work together in the same unit on the same starship?
And they only date together. Paris says the only way they'll go out is if they go out together. So
yeah, it was a conversation that makes sense in like literally any other setting, but being in this particular environment on this particular show and concept, I was like, okay, I guess. Isn't there only like 25 people on this ship or something?
Yes, I think it's like 100 after they all died. There's only about 100 people on there. So the two twins survived, fortunately. Yeah, I think that conversation hints to this. Maybe I don't know if this will be a problem, but I could see it being a problem, or I can see it just me not caring if it's a problem. They're still fairly jovial about their situation here, where they're like, we're not going to let's just have sex with people. We're not getting home anytime soon. There's no serious moment where Ensign Kim looks at a picture of his loved one and is like, oh, we're so far away from these people. It's pretty loose about what the attitude is to this journey.
Yeah. It's also not. I'm still not in love with Paris as a character. I still think he might be a little bit miscast because he seems to be very quickly turning into he's the horny Riker analog.
Yeah, he's a younger Riker.
Yeah, and I don't know. I feel like his setup is more interesting than that, but the way that I can't remember the actor's name. But the way that he's played,
Duncan McNeil
feels. Yeah, it just feels too much like he's just a stock, sexy commander character.
Yeah, because he was the most defined by the Maquis Starfleet split, right? He was the one in the middle who wasn't sure what to do. So his characterization was built off of that. But now that they've homogenized all of them, he has there's nothing to him anymore.
Right.
Even
like, especially like, I was just going to say, I think when he and Janeway were stuck in the past, there was more opportunity or room for him to kind of spout some Maquis beliefs.
He does.
In that situation.
I would say he pushes back a little more than his
bit.
Yeah, he argues with the Prime Directive. I think like that's his function there. It's not enough to be the strength of the episode, but I do wish that they would play him up as to be more of like a delinquent officer. Like he's not a fully bought into the system yet. I think that would be good for him.
Yeah, definitely.
Let's go to patron thoughts then. So that's it, everybody. Thank you very much for supporting the show and listening to the show. If you want to support the show, patreon.com/the Pensky File is the best way to do it. Patreon.com/the Pensky File. You get a whole bunch of extra stuff. You get extra podcasts. You get the ability to vote on what we cover. You're going to get all of our Picard Season 2 coverage, which is happening now, I think.
Talk about time travel.
Yes.
Going back into
the trial never ends.
Going back into the era of the CBS.
You think they've improved the costumes?
The CBS procedural SUV.
We'll see how that's going.
I'm still stuck on that. I don't know why I'm still stuck on that in that trailer. As soon as I saw like a Ford SUV doing a tight turn around a corner in New York, I was like, what is this show?
This is not.
They've just turned it into NCIS.
Yeah. Well, we might be, at this point in the recording, we might be loving Picard CSI. We might be like, this is what the series needed, and this will all be just a weird juxtaposition.
I hope so.
So you can check out all the Picard Season 2 coverage is happening right now as we are airing these episodes of Voyager. There's the Rotten Horror Picture Show special where Clay and Amanda are doing Stephen King B-roll sides. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff. And you can always leave your comments on upcoming episodes. And if you're a Captain Tier supporter, we say thank you by saying thank you to Ben Douglas, Tark Latif, Andrew Charlog, Joint Mango, Kyle Barrett, Mike Burnett, Christian Bouch, Michael Pond, Matthew Ross, Matt Cutler, Brandon Halsnick, Sergey Grim, Santos, Sean, Bradley Killens, Dwayne Hackett, Vault 13 Hero, Kevin Reyes, Darth Moss, Jordan Cooper, Russell Oj, Stefan Minden, HH28, Derek Zajac, Paul Roscoe, Jake123, Patrick Seba, Poindexter G, Dave Davies, Barry Wallace, Nick the Rat, Jamie Crow, Captain Brazen, Eric Santuan, Jacobs Gamer, Kevin Lowry, Grappa John Zorn, William Scheisler, Rayhan Jaffer, Soylent Blue, Zay Majors, Olivier Bardeur, Tom Hickey, Jose Hunters, EWNF Remixes, Dizbrada, Captain McMunchausen, James McLennan, Ed Mark Starr, Jonas, Tommy Tango, and Tuvix Mustai, Chris McLaughlin, Royo, and Rage for the Machine. So the timing's all screwed up, Clay, but we did have an up boost in the Patreon since we announced what we're doing for Voyager and Picard.
Oh, cool.
So there are a lot of different new names in the $10 list, which is much appreciated, and thank you. But
you can tell because I used that money to buy a different shirt.
That's right. We're in our own temporal mechanics, and everything is wonky in terms of timing now. So let's go to patron thoughts. If you're a patron at the $5 and up level, you leave your thoughts about an episode, we read them. Norman Buckwald says, time and again, so the third episode of the series, and you're already the second related to time travel. Plot twist. Still, it's a good one. If you overlook the hideous outfits of the planet, it's like they're begging to be annihilated. Definitely provides promise of the character Kess and already shows definite negative aspects of Neelix as her boyfriend. Janeway seems too much like Picard in her defense of the Prime Directive that, yes, I wouldn't be surprised if this was originally written for TNG. Still, not a bad time travel episode, and so I'll give it 2 sets of Delaney sisters, thus 4 out of 5.
I would absolutely be the guy in the writer's room after this episode to go, what if we did the first 10 episodes all time travel episodes?
Guys, I've realized the past 2 have been time travel. Let's just do it.
Let's just do it. Let's commit to it. And then from 11 through 22, it's all of them dealing with the insane, intense mental and physical side effects of being exposed to temporal anomalies for the past month and a half.
I believe that Voyager likes time travel the most of all the series, so I think it's a thing that they recur to.
I do know that the finale is a time travel episode, so
yes.
It makes, at least they're laying the groundwork.
They are.
So.
They're getting us ready for it. This is also the first of 9 times that Janeway will die in the series.
Does she die?
She apparently dies in this. Yeah, for a moment she's dead or something. That's what Memory Alpha says. So.
That's stretching it, I think.
No one ever dies. Let's see. I can find where it is. Where's the Janeway? Was it too hard? Oh, here it is. Episode features the first of 9 times that Janeway's death is depicted over the course of the series. On this occasion, the version of Janeway that succumbs to death is one of the alternate timelines that ultimately doesn't come to pass. Okay.
Okay.
So we don't see her die, but the timeline where she doesn't fix things, she does die at some point.
Sure, that sounds like a technicality paradox to me. But
so does that mean when they find the badges, is that the timeline in which she dies? I don't remember a scene where they leave the badges behind. Does that happen? Do they take the communicators from them?
Yes, they do.
Okay. And they just leave them in the room.
The office scene. Yeah, for the first attempt when they try to do the little portal thingy.
Yeah.
The portal opens up right after they leave, and you can see the badges on the table.
Okay, all right, that makes more sense. I really like.
So I guess technically, she dies the same way like Doc Brown dies in Back to the Future 3.
Yeah, right. Yes, there's a death of somewhere along it. I like the sequence where the guy's like, "What are these devices? Why don't you show me how you use it?" And Janeway's eyes light up as the face on the desk, and she goes to grab it. The guy's like, "Not so fast." I like that.
It was a good save on his point. It was like, maybe they're weapons though. Who's to say? Let's not find out.
James McLennan says, and so Voyager's love affair with time travel begins. As a time travel episode, this is pretty mediocre, but it's actually one of the better Prime Directive episodes, mainly because the crew doesn't sit by and watch a planet get extinguished and then reprimand Paul Sorvino for trying to save people. Of course, in true Voyager fashion, the episode doesn't even happen, and this time it makes the whole effort feel pointless. Also, hard to disagree with Norman Buckwald above. The outfits in this episode are awesome. 3 subspace fractures out of 5.
Ooh, patron fight.
Eric Sanjuan says, so that's 2 episodes in a row that have to do with space-time anomalies. I'm sensing a pattern here. Or maybe they flipped a coin in the writer's room and then, to avoid a fist fight, said, fuck it, let's just do both of them. Fine, but at least space them out a little bit, will you? Anyway, this is the better of the 2, in my opinion. Suitably entertaining popcorn television, which is what the show is, and not much more when it works. Poindexter G says, time and again, it looks like the costume department finally found a use for all of Shatner's old corsets. Those alien outfits were a bizarre choice. This is an altogether inoffensive episode, standard Trek Mystery of the Week fare. I prefer in the, quote, episode that never happened, end quote, for someone to remember and take some lesson from it. I guess Kess's premonition and the setup for her down the line will have to do.
Oh, interesting.
That kid Ben
set up for her down the line, huh?
Yeah. That kid Ben says, how many temporal problems can we run into in 1 week? They should outlaw all temporal things. Might be a war over it, maybe a cold one. 3 Optimus Prime directives out of 5. Patrick Seba says, Berman may condemn us. It's not a shit premise. The Maquis have integrated full, but what a waste with Maquis newly placed. Of Delaney sisters, they've a room full. 3 corseted Houston Astros tequila sunrise uniforms as Star Trek cosplays out of 5. They do look like the Houston Astros. That's what they look like. I was trying to think what they look exactly like the Astros. All right, there we go. Good job. Thank you, Patrick. Latte Librarian says Tom Paris is like a more worldly season 1 Bashir from DS9. 3 polaric energy conduits out of 5. Is he Bashir? I guess he is.
Paris?
Is Bashir just a young Riker? I would say he's more like Riker to me than Bashir, really.
Yeah, he seems more... Yeah, because Bashir is... It's tough because Bashir is set up as the Starfleet guy in a show full of characters who are willing to do non-Starfleet stuff. And Paris definitely doesn't feel like... Like, that would feel like Harry Kim to me.
Yeah.
Knowing little about Harry Kim, it seems like he would fit that role more than Paris does. Because I mean, Paris already left Starfleet and joined a rebel group. Yeah. So he's already more hardcore than Bashir is. Or was. At the beginning, anyway.
Yeah, maybe that's the first of his deaths. Christian Pouch said, quite a neat and horrifying concept for a disaster which wipes out a planet, albeit the analogy to nuclear power is idiotic and borderline fear-mongering. I like predestination paradox of Voyager causing the explosion, even if it's the second loop plot in a row. Voyager loves its sci-fi, but looking back, I wish they'd put more emphasis on developing their characters because I still don't know much about them, and this episode does nothing to help. I'd make a corset joke, but that topic seems to have been squeezed as much as I can be. 3.5 out of 5. Yeah, I mean, if it was a nuclear power analogy, it's pretty stupid. I don't know. I guess it kind of is, but I think it's not too much of that.
I think the only reason I think that it is because of the time period. Because I feel like nobody talks about nuclear power anymore, but between like 1980 and 1995, I feel like that was one of the things on the list that were really dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah. I see it as such a time capsule. Like, what would make me think that it's nuclear power is they're sort of like, oh no, like, can you believe that people did this when we're now at a point where, like, you know, if you're serious about climate change, you have to be serious about nuclear power. You know, it's like it's flipped so much. It's like the only way you're going to do this is if you build nuclear plants and you actually like run them well and stuff like that. So
right.
We're not getting it from the sun, people. Like it's not happening through these solar panels on your house. It's just not enough. Yeah, I don't know. But they also don't spend any time about it. It's just kind of a throwaway, like, can you believe that this is the thing that used to happen?
Yeah. Well, that's what I mean about the whole episode is I don't feel like it's really saying anything. It's kind of like using things in a fun way.
Yeah.
But I don't know that it's really has a real theme to it that it's trying to get across as so much.
Royo says the episode starts off with Janeway thinking it's a good idea to walk around a Chernobyl disaster site with no protective gear, and lo and behold, the away team gets irradiated with technobabble. When the head terrorist pulls the trigger and murders several people, he says, their lives are on your conscience, Janeway. I really cannot stand this delusional rationalization, and worse, I sometimes see audiences eat up the logic and call the hostage the killer and not the bloody hostage taker. Anyway, this episode suffers from using a thinly veiled substitute for nuclear power and then doing nothing with it. Then it becomes about adhering to the Prime Directive before it becomes about actively violating the Prime Directive to save lives. Until then, none of that ever happened. Maybe the episode should have been about something and have things actually happen in it. 2 allegories to the Voyager reset button out of 5. Matt Ross says, the weirdest part is Kess's odd cage I think he's got a typo in the word. Brazier? I don't think he wants to say brazier, but brazier, I'll say. Thing in purple and that annoying kid. I know the guns were borrowed from the crime show as the props fell through at production. Oh, really interesting. The idea of subspace pieces and time travel is interesting. The lifesavers, jumpsuits, not so much. This is also, I believe, is historic as the first Voyager reset. It's okay as any time paradox goes, but does show the bureaucratic Starfleet health form system. It could be now. 3 resets out of 5. Jonas says, this was so bland an episode that it was interesting in how bland it was. When McCool shoots the guard at the entrance to the power plant, the gun is hardly pointing at the guard when fired, and there's no blood or sign of a bullet penetrating the guard's body. The same is the case when Paris gets shot, at which point McNeil tries to act wounded. The more I see of Kess, the more I think that the universe is completely on Neelix's side. I suppose Paris is charming in this episode? 2 out of 5. Kyle Barrett says, welcome to the most generic alien world and the most generic story and the most generic Star Trek show, where people work at such non-specific places as the Media Bureau and eat things like confection bars. Episode is fine, I guess, and a 3 out of 5 if shown later in the season, but it's a bad 3rd episode of the show, introducing nothing but Kess turning into the 3-eyed raven. It's decently plotted with some nice twists, but I wish there was a bigger point as to why the story is being told. Maybe if the episode was all about enforcing that Voyager will be sticking to Starfleet principles despite its extraordinary situation, but that's barely explored. As it stands, the Doctor subplot continues to be the best part of the show. I also believe that Janeway's line, my weapon may be able to seal that hole, is Rick Berman's personal mantra. 2 condemnations of nuclear power out of 5.
I did find it funny when they were having that conversation about the timepiece, because it's like, how does this watch work? It's like, well, it works like a watch. It's like, I'm sorry, I don't understand. I'm from Chicago. How do watches work here? Same way they work in Chicago.
I like that. I kind of appreciated that. I can't remember the specific lines, but McNeil Paris is when he's talking to that guy. The human race, this alien race, is kind of set up as like contemporary humans, but when he's like pretending to be this character, he's like, doth thou have any timepieces? And he's like, this is our clock selection. He's like, how do these devices monitor the day of hour? It's like, okay, well, he's
how to tell time without a dial for the sun.
I did like his cryptic, nothing like just giving a little bit of burn to people who don't know they're going to be dead soon. He's like, I'll come back if there's time. Just walks
tomorrow.
Yeah. I like, I think Kyle brought up a good point that maybe it was what I was trying to get at with the ending here, which is that if this was about Voyager sticking to the Prime Directive in the face of a bad decision, but it's like, this is all we have at this point, we have to go by the rules. I think that that's what elevates the ending here, which is that like if their sticking to the Prime Directive causes this genocide, that's showing something about what Janeway is choosing to do in the Delta Quadrant. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I think that's something. There.
I mean, is it not something then that she's choosing not to stick with it?
It is. It could be either way, but I think early in the series, I think she has to be. I think early on, this is a very different series from what we've been watching. But early on, if there was actually this Maquis tension, right? I think Janeway trying to stick to regulation would be illuminating of her character at this point.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
She also, though, I mean, to be fair, I don't know if I 100% think she is someone who would be that rigid.
Interesting. I find her very rigid. I find her very...
I feel like she's
stiff.
rigid on the ship, but I feel like in the field, she's got a little bit more wiggle room to kind of like try some stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. But again, it's kind of a different show at this point, unfortunately.
Yeah, and just we talked about it before. Berman and Pillar didn't have a lot of good things to say about DS9, which I think is interesting, at least the first season that they worked on it. They said, the memory off of here was just saying that they're deliberately trying to describe Janeway because they felt that they failed describing Cisco in the first season of DS9.
Interesting, yeah.
I would not disagree with the fact that Cisco is probably ill-defined in the first season of DS9.
Yeah.
But what I think is interesting is that by not defining him well, it allowed the other characters a little room to branch out. Like in some ways, Cisco's the least important captain to his show.
Sure. Oh, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. I think it takes him a while to really roll into a position where he's important.
Yeah.
Or to the larger goings on at Deep Space Nine.
Yeah. So I didn't think that was a problem. I actually kind of liked it that Cisco's that way, but I do think that they are focusing on Janeway, even though at this point I think I have a hard time describing what Janeway is. We're only a couple episodes in, but she's not, I don't think she's been consistently drawn as one way or another. Cerulio said, I love that the audience stand-in, Tom Paris, still doesn't understand effect before cause time travel situations. I wish Janeway would have ended her explanation with, like last week, when we tried to rescue our future selves from that anomaly. Ringing any bells? All that being said, I usually enjoy using time travel to create what-if episodes, but I think that they're only worth doing if it changes or provides insight to the main characters like yesterday's Enterprise, Children of Time to a lesser extent, or Twilight to the least extent. 2 Delaney sisters out of 5.
Yeah, we've talked about that many times before. It's like the reason you do time travel is so your characters can learn new things about situations they took for granted or something like that. You know, you can't doing a time travel story for the sake of just doing a time travel story is fun, but it's ultimately hollow.
Yes, you have to have a killer time travel concept. The concept has to be
right,
spectacular. Grappler John Zorn says, Paris and Janeway go back in time? Man, that kid is annoying. So is the kid they meet on the planet. Not a big Tom Paris fan. Brandon Howell says, time and again, oh look, Voyager nearly caused its own destruction by trying to prevent a catastrophe which they caused in the first place. Didn't we see the same concept in Parallax? Get used to it, friends. It will be happening many more times before this show ends. The kid is still annoying. 2 child-eating demons out of 5. And finally, Rayhan Jaffa says, everyone in this episode is dressed like the interior of a fast food restaurant where I used to eat in the mid-90s. They had great hamburgers. I wonder what happened to that place. 3 candy corn people out of 5.
Well, clearly it went out of business because it doesn't have people telling you the name of the place.
Yeah.
How am I supposed to get a burger if I don't know where the burgers are coming from? That's my whole ethos.
Thank you, patrons, for your thoughts about Time and Again. Clay, we're going to go to our final thoughts here on our scale of 1 to 5. What are you going to give Time and Again? You liked it a little bit less than Parallax is what your implication was.
Yeah, I'm going to go with a 3. I think it's a higher 3, but it's still a 3 because I like it. I like the fun of the Prime Directive stuff, but I kind of wish that they pushed it further in kind of all respects, especially in the stuff in the past. I just wish they went a little bit further down the rabbit hole with their idea instead of just sort of skimming the top, getting to the fun stuff, and then kind of wrapping it up. But I like it as a concept. I think it's character-wise, it works pretty well. But yeah, I think it's a good idea, but I think they could have punched it up a bit.
I'm also going to give it a 3, which would be my third 3 in a row for Voyager. I'm enjoying Voyager so far. We talked about it before, there is a kind of comfort to this show that's different from what Enterprise was. I like the character, and I still feel that the characters are better drawn 3 episodes in here than Enterprise ever eventually got to those guys. I know what these characters are going to talk about when they're with each other, and that's kind of a comforting thing. I was wondering, and I'm giving these 3s just because I do feel that, like that patron had said previously, like I do feel that these are Voyager episodes. So I'm trying not to get too excited. And I don't think that any of these would be one that I'd be like, I have to show this to somebody because this seems like a really good episode of this show. But I am liking it. But my question is, are we just overrating Voyager at this point? Not in terms of the rating, but are we interested in this series in a way just because it's new to us, or is there something else going on?
I no. I'm going to say no, because I feel like when we started doing Deep Space Nine, and the episodes that I came on in that first season or so of Deep Space Nine, that was like, there were bad episodes in there, and there are stuff that doesn't work. There's clearly trying to figure stuff out, and so like I think we've been doing this long enough that we know subpar Star Trek when we see it. And so far, this hasn't been that. I just don't think. And I mean, maybe some of that is because, Enterprise was a Star Trek show less like the kind of Star Trek show we were familiar with. And maybe that was a barrier that we never totally got over. And Voyager is obviously closer to what we're used to.
Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe that is clicking it up a little bit at the beginning. I'm not sure. But, I mean, I have yet to... I mean, we've always done 4 episodes, so it's not really that big of a sample size. But, like, I love TNG. It's of all the shows we've watched, it's my favorite Star Trek show. You put a bad TNG episode on, I'm not going like, well, I mean... aside from the hair, what's really bad about Angel One? It's like, no, that's not how. Like you can recognize when it's dog shit, and so far I think it's been fairly solid. It's and I honestly do think a big part of that is the characters, because they do draw them so clearly. And even in TNG, I think it takes them a little bit to figure out who everybody is.
Yeah,
but this one has everybody's kind of positioned. In a relatable or identifiable way, because you start off with this kind of cataclysmic event that everybody has to be part of.
Yeah.
And so knowing I've said it a million times already, knowing where everybody comes from allows you to recognize like you're saying, what kind of conversations they're going to have, what the point of views are going to be and how they're going to conflict and stuff. And I just think that's different than Enterprise on just a pretty fundamental level.
Yeah. And just in terms of our rating, I could see a thing where Enterprise is a series of 2 out of 5s and Voyager is a series of 3 out of 5s. Like I could see that potentially being the case. But what I'm interested in is if Voyager stays this way, and again, as you said, this is a small sample size because we're early, things could tank. If Voyager's first season stays this way, and it's a fairly short season, I think it's probably the best, most consistent season of Star Trek, first season that's come out, because it's like they're not screwing anything up really at this point. I would just say that I don't think I'm severely overrating Voyager, and I'm being conscious of that, just because even in this episode, I know that you don't feel as strongly about it, and I know there were some patrons that would disagree with this as well, but I felt there was something going on here that they didn't quite wrangle, but there was like a kernel of an idea that was interesting, be it the Prime Directive exploration, or like how temporal mechanics work into that, or whether or not it's like it means anything to have the end be the way that it is. I felt there was something to chew on, and I thought that there was like a thought there behind this in a way that I don't feel about a lot of Enterprise episodes. So even if it didn't execute it well, I do think that there was a kernel here, which I found interesting. But I'll give it a 3. I enjoyed watching it. That's it. Thanks, everybody. Phage is the next episode. Thank you for leaving your comments on the Patreon, patreon.com/The Pensky File. That's how you support the show. Join the Discord if you're so interested in talking to us there. And that's it. We're going to be covering Star Trek Picard on the Patreon. Voyager continues with Phage in the next episode. Clay, do you have anything you want to say?
Keep checking out Rod and Horror Picture Show. As Wes mentioned on Patreon, we're doing the second string Stephen King adaptations. January we did It Chapter 2. February we did Silver Bullet. March we will have done Salem's Lot from the set, or the original Salem's Lot miniseries. So that's going to be a lot of fun. I got a book out. My graphic novel Bloody Hell is available in stores, and I got another one coming out, I think in March. I don't know what month we're in our own temporal timeline here, but I got another book called Poser coming out, which is a horror slasher punk rock horror slasher comic book graphic novel. So many, all those, but put on all those tags in Amazon, you'll find it.
Limit this search. That's it. We're done. Phage is up next. That is Time and Again. Voyager continues. We're heading back home slowly but surely. Thanks everybody for leaving your comments. A lot of comments early in these Voyager episodes. A lot of people talking about it on the Discord too. But
what does that tell you between Voyager and Enterprise?
It does. It does. I don't remember the first season of Enterprise, how many comments we got. Probably not as much as this. This has been the most commented on series, I think, so far.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, definitely.
All right, guys, that's it. Have a good one. We will see you next week.